Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Oregon Sea Grant's Careers in Science Investigation webinar. This is the 8th of a series of webinars intended to connect students like yourselves who are interested in marine sciences with professionals working in the field. My name is Lindsay Carroll, and I am the Marine Education Coordinator with Oregon Sea Grant, and I traditionally coordinate programming out of Hatfield Marine Science Center. Hatfield is unfortunately still closed right now, which is why we are very excited to bring you these opportunities virtually. You may ask questions of our presenters at any time during their presentations using the question and answer function labeled as Q&A at the bottom of your screen. So at any time, if you have a question, go ahead and click that box, type your question. We will get to as many questions after each of our presenters' presentations as time permits. Before we get started, we want to get to know a little bit more about you. So for those of you that have been joining us for the last couple of weeks, are very familiar with our poll questions. So our first poll question, Kate Goodwin, our Special Projects Coordinator, is going to launch it. Thank you, Kate. Please let us know what grade level you are in. Are you in elementary school, middle school, high school? Are you in college, or are you an adult? How's it looking, Kate? All right, thank you. So it looks like 11% are in elementary school, 32% are in middle school. We have 37% in high school, 16% in college, and 5% are adults. Great. Our next poll question is going to ask you to let us know where you're joining us from. Thank you, Kate. So are you joining us from Oregon? Are you joining us from the West Coast, not Oregon? Are you joining us from the Central US, the East Coast, or outside the US? So take a few seconds, let us know your response.
Do you have any predictions?
I'm gonna go ahead based off of previous webinars that most people are gonna be from Oregon. And I'll be optimistic we'll have like maybe one person from the East Coast. All right, so we have 77% are from Oregon, yay. We have 5% that are joining us from West Coast, not Oregon, 5% Central US, 9% are coming from the East Coast, and we have 5% coming from outside the US. That one person, I was right. All right, so we have a third poll question because we've done this is our 8th one, we've done 7 so far. We'd like to know how many of these you've joined. Is this your first one? Have you joined one of them, one of these CSI webinars? Have you attended several but not all? Or have you attended all of our 7 previous webinars? I'm going to be optimistic and think we have maybe one person out there that's been here the whole time.
Okay.
All right.
2 people.
So 45% of you are saying this is your first one. Welcome. Don't worry. All of the previous webinars are those recordings will be listed on our website. We'll talk more on that later. We have 14% that have attended one, 32% that have attended several, but not all. And then we have 9%, 2 people that have attended all 7. Thank you for your dedication, my friends. We hope you're getting a lot out of this. All right, so thank you, Kate. Thank you all for letting us know a little bit more information about you. We're gonna go ahead and transition into our first presenter. We are thrilled to have Dr. Tim Miller-Morgan. He serves as our aquatic animal veterinarian with Oregon Sea Grant, and he ensures the health of animals not only at Hatfield Marine Science Center, but at other aquaria along the coast. So if you're an animal lover and you want to learn all of the fun opportunities that you can take advantage of as an aquatic vet, be sure to listen up and ask Dr. Tim all of your questions. So Dr. Tim, go ahead and start sharing your screen, start your video, and begin your presentation.
Sorry, that was unmuted. Hopefully everyone can hear me now.
We can hear you, Dr. Tim.
You can hear me. All right. However, pardon, technical difficulty. I'm going to stop the share and start again. It's not working right.
Sounds good.
Okay. I need to do something different here. Sorry about that. For some reason, it popped into the middle. Okay, well, afternoon, everyone. I'm, again, Dr. Miller Morgan. I'm an extension veterinarian, and I work for Oregon State University. And I have two major jobs. I work for Oregon Sea Grant as an extension veterinarian. And that basically means that I take the research and the work that's done at the university and transfer it out to industry. And the industry I primarily work with now is the aquarium fish industry or the pet fish industry. But I'm also on the faculty at the College of Veterinary Medicine. Actually, it's the Carlson College of Veterinary Medicine now. And so I teach veterinary students there, but I also teach in our 2-year aquarium science program at the community college as well. And I teach fish and invertebrate health management. So I wear a lot of hats. One of my main jobs, though, is to be the veterinarian for the Hatfield Marine Science Center, and that's doing basically traditional veterinary medicine just with different animals. So, you know, we work with fish, where we do a lot of common procedures. This is endoscopy. We do basic exams on invertebrates, fish, even abalone. We'll do the work on. Common procedures. This is a dental procedure on a moray eel, a green moray eel. And again, these are all just common procedures we do on other animals like your dog or your cat. They just happen to be on aquatic animals. Here's a little burrfish, little eye problem there we were working on. We use a lot of the same equipment as well. This is an endoscope, but I'm using it instead of to look into the mouth and down into the stomach. I'm using it actually to look at the gills. And then over here on the right, we're using an ultrasound to assess the abdomen of a wolfeel. So we use a lot of the same equipment. It's just kind of switching your brain from working on dogs and cats and horses and pigs to working on fish and invertebrates and sharks, things like that. But one of the other jobs, that's very traditional. But the other thing for me being an extension veterinarian is I work with industry folks and I work with hobbyists. I work with people that keep pet fish. I spend a lot of time going to hobby meetings and answering questions on how to keep their animals healthy. We also teach a lot of seminars from hobbyists. Here's some pictures of some of the different seminars we've done both in Oregon and around the country. And hobbyists are very interested in learning how to keep their animals healthy and also learning how to find a veterinarian that can help them with their fish. We also work with veterinary students and industry folks. Here's again doing some more teaching with some of my colleagues. You'd be surprised that there are a number of other veterinarians that do aquatic work. Even fish, most people when they think of aquatics, they think of veterinarians working with fish and invertebrates, but they think of people working with birds and marine mammals and things like that, but there are a lot of veterinarians that work with just fish and invertebrates, and here's a few of my colleagues helping kind of teach that. We do a lot of work training veterinary students how to do aquatic work. These are a lot of just some images of different veterinary students that once they get in vet school at Oregon State, they can come out and work with us out at the coast, working with myself and then colleagues that are husbandry professionals at the Oregon Coast Aquarium and at the Marine Science Center and even at the Charleston Marine Life Center, getting some experience working with these animals. Okay, now. Again, here we also use the Oregon Coast Aquarium sometimes to teach some of our classes, and the aquarium science program has their own building, and so here's some images working up there with the students. And again, as I mentioned, we also work with industry folks. Here's a seminar that we were doing with training. In this case, these were people that import koi and goldfish into the U.S. and teaching them how to keep their fish healthy and how to manage their fish and kind of improve the health of their animals, just like we would if we were working with pig farmers or cattle ranchers. And that's actually what's kind of exciting about that. It's taken me all over the world, and so I've had the opportunity to work do the same type of industry seminars, teaching people how to do fish health in Brazil and in Indonesia and Malaysia and Singapore and Japan and a number of other countries, Israel, and which is kind of exciting. And I'll have to say, it wasn't something I thought I would end up doing when I got into this profession, but it's pretty fun. Get to see parts of the world, and you realize that everybody's interested in keeping their animals healthy and wants to take good care of them. And so it's nice to just sort of meet other people and learn about other cultures. Oops, sorry. This is just a shot. I was doing some work in Indonesia, and this is down in Bali. It's kind of near where we were staying. Again, it's also led me to be involved in some projects. So this is a project we did in Indonesia where we were working with aquarium fish collectors and the exporters. Those are the companies that ship the fish to the United States. And they had asked us to come over and assess their facilities and how they were handling their fish, and asked us to make suggestions. So we came in and we did health exams on their fish and tried to find out if there were anything wrong. If there were things wrong, we tried to work with them to help improve those things. I'm having an issue with my advancement. Koi are a big part of what I do. Not as much now, but early on, I worked a lot with koi, and Japan has a very large koi industry. And so I spent a lot of years going over there in the fall for their harvest, basically working with our importers, the people that go over to Japan and buy the fish, and then working with their exporters and their farmers, and kind of learning about how they did health management and trying to make suggestions if they were interested, but also to assess the health of the fish before they came into the United States. So it's another part of my job that is a little bit unique from a traditional veterinarian. I also have the opportunity to work with other colleagues. This is a colleague of mine, a Japanese veterinarian who works with an aquarium over there, and we spent a fair amount of time in his aquarium talking about how we approached similar problems, but in different ways. The other thing that's unique about Japan is I have a hard time fitting in Japan. I'm 6'5", and so not even the hotel rooms necessarily fit me well. We did some work with the industry, the aquaculture industry in Israel, and had an opportunity there to go and work with their fish farmers, which was pretty exciting. And again, something kind of unique, but sort of an unexpected part of the job. Did the same thing in India, working with, these are a bunch of fish farmers in India. They're raising fish for the pet trade. And so we went over there, and we actually did a video in the language in this state, which is Malayalam. We shot this video in that language. I spoke in English and they dubbed it, but on basically fish health management on the farm, which was pretty exciting. So a project that I'm really involved in, and you may have read about it in the blurb about this seminar, is I've been involved in a project in Brazil now for almost 10 years, and I work in the Brazilian Amazon, and I've been leading, co-leading expeditions in the last 2 years, been leading an expedition down there. And we work on the Rio Negro, which is the largest tributary of the Amazon River itself. And you can see here's Brazil down here, and my pointer, you need my pointer. Oops. Okay, oops, sorry. Anyway, this river here that's coming up through the middle of the slide is the Rio Negro. And I'll show you where we work is in the middle Rio Negro, which is, I apologize, I can't get my pointer to work.
I think we can see your arrow though, your
Can
mouse. Yeah, if you move it around.
Well, I can't see it.
Actually, I don't see it now, but I did.
I'll just keep describing it. So if you look at the middle of the slide, the Rio Negro is that river that's going up there. And if you look kind of in the middle of that river, you'll see a little red cross. That's an airport. And that's the city of Barcelos. And that's sort of the center of this fishery. And what we do is we work with a sustainable fishery up there where they're collecting fish for the aquarium trade. And we work with the fishing communities there. And the idea is that these fishing communities are collecting these fish in a sustainable fashion, but also because they're out in the jungle, they're helping to protect the jungle from logging, illegal logging and mining and that kind of thing. And so what's really neat about this project is we're helping them basically maintain their fishery, but also at the same time promoting that they still have jobs in this fishery, sustainable harvesting, by sustainably harvesting fish, but they're also protecting the environment. So our project is called Project Piaba, and the motto is "Buy a fish, save a tree." And really, by buying these fish from this area, you're helping to preserve the rainforest in this part of the Amazon basin. So it's a really exciting project. We work off of this boat. This is the Iracema, and it's a riverboat, and it's designed to go into really shallow waters. And then when we're out in the field, we use these green canoes. But the boat is nice. We have the top deck. Under that cover, we set up a lab, and then we also can do lectures and seminars too, because we bring students with us down on the second deck. In the back, towards the stern, there's a little dining room with a flat screen and all that. So this is what the area looks like. It's a flooded forest, and we're down there just as the water level is starting to come back up usually. But this gives you an idea of kind of where we work in this area. We've actually been involved in making a couple documentaries down there. This is one of the cameramen that came down with us one year. It's a pretty exciting place to work, and you get to see some amazing fish and amazing wildlife. Here I'm the person in the blue shirt, and I'm working with a colleague of mine who actually runs a very large fish store up in Portland, and he's been heavily involved in this project. This is one of the major fish that we look at. These are called cardinal tetras, probably the most famous fish that comes out of there next to the discus. But we also see a lot of freshwater stingrays and piranha. These are jaguar catfish. You can see here's our lab up on the deck, and you just get an idea of the kind of things we work at. This is the city of Barcelos. This is what you see as you're coming into the city. We work with a number of small villages. This is one we've worked with for many years called Deriquois, a little village of about 12 families. And this is the whole village together with everybody that was on the expedition one year. Just shot this picture. Just give you some pictures. They're collecting some fish. These are some of the fishers out there that we work with. Just collecting the fish. And if you have questions about this, we can talk about it later. The other thing that's really exciting working down there is they have pink river dolphins, and there's also a gray river dolphin, but I'm now involved in a project to work with these pink dolphins and looking at health assessments and population structure, which is kind of exciting. This is Manaus, the big city at the mouth of the Rio Negro, where it joins the Amazon, and this is like the bus station. Everybody travels around the Amazon on riverboats, so this is where they all come in, people to depart and arrive and all that. And this is where the Amazon and the Rio Negro meet. And you can see the brown water is the Amazon and the Rio Negro is the darker water. So that gives you a quick overview of kind of some of the things that I do. I have a really varied job. It isn't what I expected, but I'm not complaining. It's pretty fun. It can be hard work at times, and you spend a lot of time away from home, but it's pretty interesting. Now, I thought just briefly the last few minutes I'd talk about how I got into this, what my training was, and how I got into all of this. And well, I'd wanted to be a veterinarian for quite a while, and what really got me interested is this book. I don't know if any of you have read this book, but All Creatures Great and Small, I read probably when I was in middle school, and that just got me really interested in being a veterinarian. But I was also interested in whales and marine animals, and I wanted to try to figure out how to balance that. But the whole series of books was really what hooked me. And then when I was in high school, I started volunteering at Point Defiance Zoo and Aquarium in Tacoma, and I had an opportunity to bottle raise 2 walrus pups when I was in high school. And so these are the 2. The one in the front is E.T. and the one in the back is Rosie. Now E.T. just passed away a couple of years ago, but I got to bottle raise them, and that just sort of hooked me on working with marine animals. And I thought I'd go into marine mammal work, but as I sort of went on, I found that while I was very interested in marine mammals, I had a lot of interest in fish and invertebrates as well. And so I thought, well, I'd always get back to marine mammals, and I have recently with that other project, but I went to University of Puget Sound and got involved in a lot of different projects. I basically volunteered as a research assistant to get experience with different animals. So I did a project with Dungeness crab. I did a project with beluga whales. Um, I worked in Mount St. Helens with a professor looking at amphibian recovery up there after the eruption. And then I also started working as a wilderness guide in northern Washington, up in the North Cascades, and in Maine. And I did that for a number of years in the summers. And the skills of leading trips like that became really helpful as I started leading trips overseas. I went to Eastern Washington, to Washington State, and got a degree in in wildlife biology. And I got involved in projects to learn as much as I could. I got involved in a sage grouse habitat project, how they utilize the land that they live on. I got to work on a project looking at live traps and humane alternatives. It was really interesting. The big thing I got out of that was how to talk with people that maybe you disagreed with and how to work with them effectively and communicate effectively. That was really useful for me later on. Then I got involved in a bear research project where we were studying hibernation physiology. I worked with grizzly bears and black bears for a number of years. Then I went to veterinary school at Washington State. And there I continued to work with aquatics. I worked on population genetics with rainbow trout. I went and studied programs specifically in aquatic medicine in Minnesota and in Massachusetts and in Galveston, Texas. And then I did clinical training, and this was all part of my veterinary curriculum. I did the traditional veterinary curriculum, but then I added additional training on. So I worked in the oyster industry up in Washington doing health management. And then I got clinical training working in trout farms down in southern Idaho. I went and worked at the National Aquarium in Baltimore and got clinical training, worked on just general medical care of the animals there, but then also developed protocols for the animals that were used in teaching programs, outreach animals. Then I came here to Oregon State to get a PhD in fish pathology, and then got very sidetracked. I became the senior aquarist at the visitor center while I was working on my graduate degree, where I did some more research, working on bacterial kidney disease. And then I started working with the head vet at the Oregon Coast Aquarium and actually became one of the veterinarians there, and which I still do on the side. It's not part of my job with Oregon State University, but I still do that. And that all that experience led me to the jobs that I have now. And I feel pretty fortunate, and it's a really interesting job. I mean, you have a nice mix of doing medicine, really good, cutting edge medicine, but then also getting to teach people and interact with everybody from, you guys in elementary, junior high, and high school, all the way to working with professional veterinarians and all these different industry people in different countries with different needs and trying to figure out how best to help them out is just really, really pretty exciting. And then, as I said, I've gotten back to the whales recently. So working with Amazon River Dolphin Conservation Foundation, and that's been pretty fun. So with that, I can open it up for some questions.
Fantastic, Dr. Tim. It's always great to hear all of the different projects, the variety of projects that you've gotten involved in, and really how you got to be where you are today. So thank you for that. We've gotten a lot of, you've started to address a lot of the questions of kind of what was your training, but I will kind of morph some of these questions into one and ask you, some of these participants are middle school or high school. So what types of experiences, what types of things should they be considering now if they want to gear up for a career in vet medicine?
I would say, first of all, try to volunteer or get as much experience as you can working with different types of animals. And you could maybe volunteer at a zoo or aquarium or even a shelter. I actually volunteered for a while at a veterinary clinic, just helping clean up and things like that. And then when I was older, they let me participate or at least observe with medical procedures. And the other thing is, I would say, is really focus on your academics. You're going to need to be strong in math. You're going to need to be strong in science, but also you need to be able to write and speak well. You want to be able to communicate with your clients. So that's something I would really spend a fair amount of time on. I was fortunate when I was in high school. I had some English teachers that were really, I would say, kind of hard, but they really taught me to write pretty well. And then of course that I had to do a lot more of that when I was in college, but it's worth putting the effort into that.
Fantastic, thank you. And just to put it into context, how many years of school? So in terms of college, so how many years of training to get to be where you are?
Well, to graduate as a veterinarian, traditionally you would have to have a 4-year undergraduate degree, so a bachelor's of science. Usually they would like it to be in biological sciences or something like that, but it doesn't have to be. And then you figure you have 4 years of veterinary school once you get in. So minimum, you're looking at 8 years of training. If you want to specialize, typically you would do another 1 to 3 years in some kind of specialty training after that. Oftentimes that is you actually get a stipend and some of that tuition might be covered, but that's sort of the minimum. Now, I said, a bachelor's degree in the sciences is required, but I had a couple classmates that did not have that. They met their minimum requirements in the sciences for vet school, but they had other degrees. For instance, my lab mate in my first year had a degree in French literature, but he had also finished all of his requirements for vet school, and he did really well. So that doesn't mean if you want to study something else, as long as you can meet the requirements to get in, you're going to have just as good a chance as anyone else.
Fantastic. Thank you for that insight. And we do have lots of questions coming in, but we are going to work with Dr. Tim after the fact he's going to write up some answers, and we're going to post the answers to those questions that we didn't get to, along with our webinar recording. So if you still have questions for Dr. Tim Miller Morgan, go ahead and type it into the Q&A, but we're going to have to move on to our next presenter. So thank you, Dr. Tim, for your fantastic presentation. And
thanks for inviting me.
Of course. And so now we're going to transition to our next presenter. And so I'd like to introduce Michael Moses. He works for an Oregon state agency called, yes, Michael's waving, hello. He works for a state agency called the Department of Land Conservation and Development. Say that 3 times fast. He's going to tell you about the fun marine science focused work that he's done leading up to where he is today, including his research focused on ocean acidification. There were a couple of folks that requested to hear about someone who worked in ocean acidification in our post survey. So he's going to explain to you the science behind that and all of his experiences leading to where he is today. So Michael, go ahead, and you've started to share your screen. You've shared your video. You're good to go. Go ahead and get started.
All right. Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you, everybody, for inviting me and for having me. I'm super excited to be here and tell you all about ocean acidification and being a scientist, and look forward to your questions. So I hope everybody can see my slide here. And like Lindsay introduced me, my name's Michael Moses, and I do work for the state of Oregon right now. I'm the Rocky Shores coordinator. So if you ever go to the Oregon coast and you see those big cliffs and offshore rocks like Haystack Rock or Cape Kiwanda, things like that, that's what I'm in charge of looking at managing right now. So we're rewriting how the state of Oregon manages those areas. So that's my primary job right now, but that's just where I'm at these days. But there's plenty of other things that I've done leading up to getting here, including a lot of work on the ocean and about the ocean. So I'll walk you through some of that. I'll give you my tips as I see it for how to become a scientist or get into the sciences, and then I'll spend a few minutes trying to explain to everybody about a little bit about ocean acidification and how it works. And so a little bit for the younger crowd, a little bit for the older crowd. So you take out of it what you can get. So I'll tell you a little bit first about my experiences getting into science. There we go. So my very windy career path. So many years ago, I went to college. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I didn't really even think about doing something in science. I was an English major when I started out because I really like to read and write. But later, I got turned on by a biology class to the idea of becoming a scientist and working out in the field, as we call it. So, working outdoors. So I was very lucky in that a few years later, I wasn't really getting the jobs in science like I wanted to. So I decided I'd go back to school at Oregon State University, take a few classes, and just see where it led me. And that ended up being a really good decision for me. So I ended up working a whole series of field jobs doing exactly the kinds of things I wanted to do at that time. However, back then, the ocean wasn't on my mind at all. I was really focused on streams and fish in streams and animals related to streams in forests and mountains. So I ended up doing a few field jobs like that. So you can see here, there's a few pictures of me with a hard hat on. That was working for Oregon Department of Forestry, surveying streams so we could see how logging, a timber harvest was affecting those really small mountain streams and the fish that live in them. And after that, I kind of transitioned to birds, of all things. So here's taking a blood sample from a warbler. There we were seeing how birds were responding in the same way to the timber harvest around these small mountain streams. And then I was lucky enough to survey some spotted owls. So maybe you heard about, maybe you haven't. About 30 years ago, there was a big debate about spotted owls and should we protect them and how should we protect them. So I got to do some of that work just a few years ago. And then after that, I was looking for a job and I wound up in a chemistry lab of all things. And I really have a biology background. I don't consider myself a chemist at all, but I ended up working in a chemistry lab and I learned a ton about chemistry and how to use it. And then that job ended up leading to me getting into the ocean. So someone said they needed somebody that knew a little bit about chemistry to come volunteer in their lab, unpaid. And I said, oh, yeah, I can do it. I know a little chemistry. It sounds like what you're doing is really interesting. I don't know anything about the ocean. I've never been on a boat before. So I said, yeah, I would do it. And that changed the course of my career. So I ended up working for a group called PISCO at Oregon State University, and they do all the research on ocean acidification and hypoxia and all the things, how this plays out in the environment and with all these ecological communities. So I ended up working on some research boats. You see here behind me in my virtual background, the Alaka that I worked on quite a bit and a few others. We would go out a few times a month on the ocean and sample the water at different depths and different locations, and that would tell us a lot about the health of the seawater and what maybe some of the sea life is doing in response to the changes that we are observing. So I did that off and on during the summer seasons for quite a few years, and in the meantime I was working in the chemistry labs at other places, and I ended up connecting with some other people, and I did some research on seagrass, which we have a lot of seagrass here in Oregon in our estuaries where the rivers meet the ocean. And so I looked at the health of the seagrass and how it was responding to an invasive species, and how things like bacteria and the little bugs that eat the seagrass were changing in response to things like warming and acidification and invasive species. So I got to do all kinds of things, and including lots more sea time. So that was really great. And recently, though, I started my new job at Department of Land Conservation and Development, caring for the Rocky Shores. And so that's where I'm at today. And I just wanted to provide a few tips for anyone who's thinking about going into science or who wants to go into science. So kind of reflecting back on my years of really trying to find my way into science and the things that I think would have helped me when I was just starting out. So here's my few tips for prospective scientists among you. So one, I would say it's not all about getting good grades. Dr. Tim said, keep your grades up, and that's absolutely certainly true, and that's going to do a lot for you. But I'd say from my experience, I didn't always have the best grades. I didn't have the worst grades, but I didn't always have the best grades, and that really made me feel like maybe I couldn't do it or maybe I didn't belong. So I just want to encourage folks, especially those of you who are still in middle school and high school, thinking about your grades and going to college and becoming scientists. Keep them up, do what you can. It's important, but it's not the only thing that's going to make or break a science career. And also, neither is being the smartest person in the room. There's a lot of times I'd meet people who were doing what I wanted to do, who were working in science, and I thought, man, that person's really smart. I'm not smart as that guy or that lady, and I don't know if that means I can be a scientist. And you know what I've learned? It's really not about being the smartest person in the room. It's more about being dedicated to learning what you want to learn, perseverance. So really just don't give up when something stands in your way, and just hard work. Hard work really, really pays off in science, and you'll learn all the things you need to learn, and you'll get to where you want to go if that's what you're focused on. And also, it's especially about making good relationships. So you see some pictures here of me with some of my crews, and the relationships that I made in science are really what almost every time made it so great, and really what enabled me to learn more and to do more and to go on to the next step. So I would say really focus on hard work and making good relationships if you really want to go far in science. A few other tips to keep in mind is that it takes time. It doesn't happen right away. It took me many years to get where I am. And, I was in and out of school. I didn't follow the traditional track a lot of students might do, to just go straight to college out of high school and then straight to grad school and then go on to their career. I was in and out of college all the time and doing different jobs, and that's what worked for me. So if that's what's ends up happening to you, don't get impatient, don't lose hope. You can still do it. And be open to new experiences. Say yes when somebody says, hey, do you want to come work in my lab, volunteer, try this project, join us on this field expedition? Even if you think like, well, I'm really into birds, I don't care about the ocean, you should just say yes, because you never know what kinds of doors it's going to open for you. Also, make a plan for yourself, kind of figure out what you do and don't like. Learning what you don't like is just as important as what you do like, but also expect that it might change over the years. So like I said, I didn't expect to go into marine sciences, and here I am, and it's where I want to stay. And lastly, remember that the perfect is the enemy of the good. So this is one thing that I had to learn the hard way, that I always wanted to do things just right and get them perfect. But what that means is I spent a lot of time just trying to get that one little detail when everything else was really, really good, and I could just move on to the next thing. And so don't put that pressure on yourself to always do everything perfect or just right. If it's good enough, that's great. That's better than having nothing at all. So that's something to keep in mind, I would say. So I was asked to talk a little bit about ocean acidification, so I'm going to transition to that a little bit now. So let's talk about that. So, when we talk about ocean acidification, you often hear climate change thrown into the conversation at the same time. And why is that? Well, the thing is that climate change and ocean acidification are really closely related. So a lot of times people call ocean acidification the evil twin of climate change. And it's because they're both caused by the same thing. And that happens to be carbon dioxide, or CO2, in the air, in the atmosphere, that humans are producing, either by burning fossil fuels or cutting down forests and things like this. So it does different things once it gets into the atmosphere. And when it comes to ocean acidification, what happens is humans produce extra CO2 into the atmosphere, and then it gets absorbed into the ocean, into the surface of the ocean. So if you've ever opened a bottle of pop and you hear that, like, that's the gas coming out, well, that's because that bottle is under pressure and has a bunch of CO2 in the water, and that's really holding it in the liquid in your bottle of soda. But once you release it, it all comes out. It wants to equalize. It wants to be the same. So currently, about a quarter of all the CO2 that humans have produced gets absorbed into the ocean. And that's because as we put more in the air, it wants to equalize with the sea surface. It wants to be the same. So the more we put in, the more it pushes some of that into the ocean. It gets absorbed into the ocean. And once it gets absorbed into the ocean, it undergoes a whole slew of chemistry changes, and then it starts to affect all the fish and other sea life that are in the ocean. And so we usually report this as a decrease in what we call pH, so acidity. So that's where the term ocean acidification comes from. But in reality, pH is just one of the many, many changes and things that are happening. So let's take a quick look at some of those. I'll try not to scare you too much with some chemistry, but maybe just a little bit, but don't worry about it. So real quick, that I mentioned pH. So here's the pH scale. That goes from 0 to 14. 7 is like perfectly neutral. So what we normally think of as water is right around 7. Not acidic and it's not basic. But the thing to remember here is the ocean pH. So the average ocean pH is 8.3. So it's a little more on the basic side. But as we've been putting more carbon dioxide in the air and that's going into the ocean, that's starting to shift the pH of the ocean. It's moving down. So now it's more like 8.15. It's in the last 100 years or so. So that's a little more towards the acidic end. So that's why we call it ocean acidification, because we're pushing it more and more towards the acidic state. But that's not to say that the ocean is itself an acid or will dissolve you or anything like that. It's really not like that. It's just this change in the pH happening. So, and here comes the scary slide. So if it's too scary for you, just look away. But I'll try and walk you through it really fast and see if we can get something out of it. So all that carbon dioxide that's in the air, it's going into the ocean. And once it goes into the ocean, it meets a water molecule. So a lot of you probably already know this. It's H2O, right? So the CO2 and the H2O, they combine and kind of mix around their atoms, and they produce what you see there as an HCO3. That's a bicarbonate. It's actually just baking soda like you have in your cabinet at home. But what ends up happening is it's H2O, there's two H's. So only one of those H's goes to the baking soda. The other H floats around and it finds another molecule, and that's called carbonate. That's that CO3, and it's related. And those two, when they meet, they mash up and it makes one more bicarbonate ion. So one more baking soda ion. And you see those H's floating around, that's where we get pH. The pH is just a measure of how many of those H's do we have floating around in the water. So as you can see, once the CO2 goes in, we have 2 extra H's. So we're gonna make things a little more acidic there. But the important thing to remember here is that for every one CO2 molecule we add, we're gonna lose 1 carbonate ion and gain 2 bicarbonate ions. So the important thing here is that we're losing that carbonate ion. That carbonate ion is really, really important because as you can see, it's coming from that shell that over in the corner there. Carbonate ions are what make up shelled organisms, so calcifiers. So anything with a calcium shell is made out of that carbonate ion. So this is what it actually looks like, but I'm not gonna explain any of that to you. It gets really, really complicated, but you know, if I tried to explain that to you, your brains would probably melt out your ears. So let's just skip that part. Let's talk a little bit about ocean acidification real quick, about how it's affecting us and stories that we've had about it. So one story you might have heard about was the near crash of the oyster industry here in Oregon about 10 years ago when oyster larvae at Whiskey Creek Shellfish Hatchery, which is in Netarts, so that's close to Tillamook, all of a sudden the oyster larvae started to die and they wouldn't grow. And nobody knew why. And it was almost overnight. For some reason, the adult oysters, they did just fine, but the baby oysters couldn't handle it. So ocean acidification experts from Oregon State University were called to come in and figure it out. And they put in some instruments in the water and looked at the chemistry, and they found out that, well, you know, it's this ocean acidification problem. It's that all those carbonate ions that the oysters need to build their shells were being absorbed into the bicarbonate. So they were going away. They weren't available anymore for them to build their shells. So the scientists from OSU, they were able to redirect the water flow coming in and treat it a little bit chemically and kind of restore it back to where it needed to go, and saved the oyster industry in Oregon almost overnight And that's a $30 million industry. And that was just like one tiny chemical change from ocean acidification. So what about other calcifiers, other things with shells? So what about them? So it turns out that it affects a lot of them and in different ways, and can also have other consequences for other sea life. So these pteropods here you see on the bottom, when they were exposed to ocean acidification, their shells slowly started to dissolve away. And it's because those carbonate ions were leaching out into the water, being pulled away into the water. And that was really scary because these pteropods are really, really important food for salmon. So if the pteropods start to go away, then the salmon are going to start to go away. But it's also a problem for many other organisms now that we're finding, and many things that don't have shells or don't rely on calcium to build their body structures. So I'm going to walk you through a couple of examples real quick before we wrap it up here. So one big story that came out of the scientific research here is about Nemo, our clownfish. So we found that when the clownfish were exposed to ocean acidification, they couldn't smell their way home anymore. So clownfish, they nest and reproduce in sea anemones here, and they always go back to the same spot that their parents went to and their grandparents every time. But when the ocean acidification conditions changed, they couldn't smell their way home anymore. They were going to all kinds of different places. And when it got really, really bad, so when the pH was really low, they couldn't smell anything at all, including the predators that eat them. So that got really scary and for the clownfish. But you might think to yourself, well, that's too bad. But there's no clownfish in Oregon. That's a tropical species. So what do we have to worry about? And it turns out that the way that ocean acidification was affecting their ability to smell, it's something that's common to every vertebrate organism. So everything with a backbone has this exact same pathway and could be vulnerable to this. So that means our other salmon and our other sea life could be vulnerable to this change as well. So that's something to keep in mind. We've seen similar effects with our rockfishes here off the Oregon coast. A couple other examples too of ocean acidification. It acts at the community level, so not just affecting one kind of organism, but it affects the way organisms interact with one another. So for example, ocean acidification in combination with warming affected these crabs, and it changed the way that the crabs behaved. And the crabs eat the snails and the mussels, and the snails eat the mussels, and so it affected the way that the crabs started to focus more on the snails, and the snails started to run around faster, so they didn't have as much time to eat the mussels, and so it kind of really changed what the whole community looked like. Another example here that you can see on the right, and this is kind of a scary science graph, you can ignore it, but there was two groups of sea urchins that they tested. And so they wanted to see how the sea urchins lived when they were placed in ocean acidification conditions versus if they just were born in ocean acidification conditions. And it turns out that those two situations get different results. So the ones that were raised in the ocean acidification conditions, they really didn't do very well. They were thick and they didn't live as long. But their offspring ended up doing a little bit better. And it's because we were kind of selecting for the DNA that was able to adapt to the conditions a little bit differently. So ocean acidification can also interact with other things that we call stressors. So, things that might make the environment a little more inhospitable for them. So it can interact with things like biological activity, river runoff from the land, low oxygen in the water, warming, so climate change feeding back into this, mixing of the ocean, upwelling, which is kind of another kind of mixing, and many other stressors that could impact how ocean acidification is affecting all these organisms. So what do we need to take out of this? What do we need to understand about what's going on with ocean acidification? Because one important thing to understand about ocean acidification in science is that this is fairly new understanding. We've only really come to understand ocean acidification in the last 30 years or so, But most of the research that's been done on it has happened probably in your lifetimes, which isn't a very long time for science. But it's the things we need to remember going forward here as we try to understand more and more about how ocean acidification impacts the ocean is that it's based on the different species and the life stage they're in, and that it depends on how well that they can handle it. Some can handle it really well, some are much more sensitive to it. It interacts not only with species and their relationships, but their relationships with the environment. And that all these things are really still kind of being understood, and that in order to do something more about it, we need to think more about how we manage these species and these environments. So then really the last thing is what can we do about it? Well, besides more scientific research, I got a few suggestions here for folks that you can do in your personal life and think about doing in the future maybe. So one is obviously reduce fossil fuel consumption. So don't burn so much gas. Maybe try and see if we can get more fuel efficient cars like electric cars, or ride in carpools more often. Make your home more energy efficient. So buy more energy efficient appliances, like a heat pump or a better washer and dryer. Switch to LED light bulbs. Use green or renewable energy, so things like wind and solar we need to invest in. Eat less meat and dairy. Unfortunately, a lot of the problem is coming from our need for cattle. So not saying don't eat any meat if you don't want to, but if we all eat less as a society, that would help the problem. And lastly, encourage folks to vote. And if you're old enough, go out and vote yourself. So change how we manage these things, what the policies are. And finally, if you really, really want to make a difference, I think the best thing you can do is try and pursue a career in science, or in academia, or in law, or in government, or any of the things that really have a say as far as understanding what the problem is and what we can do about it. So those would be my tips for going forward. And now, if there's any questions, I hope we have a few minutes for it. But thank you very much.
Thank you, Moses, for your excellent presentation full of insights of how to become a scientist, and those are very helpful tips. And then also giving some insights to what it's like to research ocean acidification. It sounds like there's a lot of research that still needs to be done. So for those of you listening, if you're interested in chemistry and research like that, there's definitely space for learning more. So with that said, question would be, what type of classes, like if someone wants to work in ocean acidification in their future, when we say chemistry, that's one thing, but are there other classes, other coursework that folks should consider if they want to continue the research effort?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Chemistry could certainly help you. I had a little bit of background in chemistry. It certainly helped me, but I learned a lot of what I needed to learn on the job. But as far as classes, I would say, try out a lot of different classes that help you understand the earth and the ocean and biology and chemistry and the environment, but also people. So law and policy and society. All of those things are going to be really important to any science career. But I think especially when you're a young college student, casting your net wide is really going to help you understand all the different things that play into all of this science, and really where you see your path going, and importantly too, not going.
Thank you very much. We have a question that hopefully I think you would be able to answer from Daxi, is why do clownfish like anemones so much?
Oh, that's a great question. And I'm sorry, I'm not a marine biologist, so I know a little bit about fish, but mostly fish that are here in Oregon. And like I mentioned, clownfish are tropical species. So unfortunately, I don't know. That's great. I'm going to have to look that up after this, though. I think they like it for protection. That would be my guess.
I think that the anemone, they have that like the mucus on the outside of their, I'm sure, Dr. Tim, are you going to chime in here?
Yeah, it's a symbiotic relationship that's evolved, where the anemones protect the clownfish and the clownfish protect the anemones, and they develop a thick layer of mucus so that they don't get stung.
Awesome.
Very good. This is why we have the aquatic animal vet on here as well. Okay, So we did have a question of what kinds of, middle schoolers, what kind of experiences, could they be doing, kind of expanding on Dr. Tim and whatnot. What kind of experiences could they be considering moving forward?
That one's for me?
Yes, that's for
Yeah,
you.
okay, sorry. Well, middle school, you got lots of time to think about it, lots of time to get new experiences and learn new things. So that's great that you're already thinking about it now. I would say, there's a lot of experiential camps, day camps, overnight camps, these kinds of things, at least at Oregon State University and at Hatfield Marine Science Center in Newport and several other places throughout Oregon. I would encourage you, if you can, to participate in those events. Some of them are like a week-long class or maybe just a weekend or two, things like that. And we have them for kids of all ages, including all the way through college. And these are really great experiences you can come meet scientists, see the research they're doing, see the facilities and the instruments that they use. So, I encourage you to look into that, ask your parents about it, and see if you can participate in some of those events.
Great, thank you. I'm going to squeeze one more question. Thank you, everyone, for sticking it out with us. How has the pandemic changed your work?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, my current work, of course, I'm not as in the field really. So thankfully, I didn't have any major travel that got disrupted, other than a few talks like something like this. But mostly I've just been working at home. I'm sitting here in my garage, and I don't know if you can hear my neighbor decided to come out and weed whack his lawn, but it's been an adjustment, but mostly I've just been sitting at home trying to do the best I can, like a lot of folks are. And I'm spending a lot more time on Zoom and on the phone than I used to, that's for sure. But because like I pointed out, those relationships are really important. I'd much rather be meeting everyone in person if I could. So that's probably the biggest drawback.
Fantastic, Moses. Thank you so much. You covered a lot in 20 minutes. So kudos to you on giving our young scientists some tips so that they can pursue their dreams. So I'm going to go ahead and do my multitasking and share my screen and wrap it up here for us. Thank you all for sticking it out with us. We would love your feedback. So go ahead and give us your feedback via this survey link. Kate is going to drop these links into the chat box, which is separate from the Q&A box. But you can either copy and paste these links, or when you close out of this webinar, you will be prompted to take the survey then. So please give our feedback, or give us your feedback. We also have all of our previous recordings through the end of May uploaded on our Career Day website. And then you thought we may have been going away for the season, but we actually have one more opportunity in 2 weeks. We're actually going to be featuring some researchers that are going to be heading out on an expedition via the research vessel Oceanus. This is the Oregon State University operated research vessel. And so these researchers are gearing up to take off in July. And so they will be collecting sediment cores from the deep ocean, or from deep in the ocean, to gain prehistoric information about the marine environment. And so this is another opportunity, building on other folks that have come on and talked about what it's like to do research from a boat or out at sea or on research vessels. So we encourage you to come learn about their work so that you can follow along with their progress during their expedition. If all works out for them, they hope to have some sort of live feed, but I'm not making any promises. So go ahead and check out our Career Day website for more information and registration. Again, that is in 2 weeks on June 24th at 4 p.m. That is all we have time for today. Thank you again for sticking it out a little late with us today. We want to take a few quick seconds to thank again our presenters, Dr. Tim Miller-Morgan and Michael Moses, for their time and their presentations. And we want to thank you participants for joining us. And we hope to see you again in 2 weeks. Have a great evening, everyone. Bye-bye.